Hi folks, Robert O'Brien from O'Brien Guitars and the Luthier Academy. And today we're going to set a neck on a steel string guitar using the Robert O'Brien Luthier Academy neck angle jig made by Skyscraper Guitars. Let's go. So for you guys who have taken my classes in-house or have my online video course, you hear me use the analogy of building the house. If the basement is square and plumb, as you build up, the roof fits. If the basement's not square and plumb, as you build up, you're compounding your problem, nothing fits. This is your basement right here, folks. Can you imagine trying to set a neck on an area that's not flat? It's like this, or like this, or like this, or this is not flat. So make sure you get this flat. I even take a straight edge, and everywhere that neck is going to be, I go ahead and make sure it's flat there. I also go ahead and make sure that it's flat here. That is very important. Don't even attempt to set your neck until you have this area all ready to go. In the video here, I'm going to be using a cutaway guitar I'm building here with a student this week. And if you're doing a non-cutaway, the process is the same. All right, so here's the O'Brien Guitars Luthier Academy neck angle jig. This is Gen 3. It's gone through several generations. LMI used to make it. When they went out of business, they stopped making it. So now Greg at Skyscraper Guitars is making it for me. I've got it clamped to the edge of a Black & Decker workmate, and I have a theory that I think you cannot be a luthier unless you have a Black & Decker workmate. Every luthier needs a Black & Decker workmate. I've got this set up, so we're going to be working on the Mortise side, which is the body side. And so that's extended off the edge of the workmate here. And I'm going to come in and clamp the body into this side of the jig. So on the Mortise side, which is the cavity for the body, there's a center line on the jig. Make sure you put a center line on your guitar and go ahead and push it up in there and make sure that those center lines align. Now, I jokingly say that center lines are overrated, but in this case, you do want to find the center line. Also make sure that the sides where they come to the heel block are pushed all the way up against the bottom side of the jig. And then I just tighten these until I hear a crack. And then I back off a quarter turn. I'm kidding, guys. You don't want to hear a crack. But I do snug it up fairly tight. I've never had one drop out, folks. There we go. Next thing we're going to do is set the depth of cut into the body. And this template here is adjustable. I like for the end of my neck to come right at the seam where the binding meets the side. And I like for the tenon to come a few millimeters back from that. Now, we're going to talk about the router setup here in a minute, but it has a guide bushing on it and also a router bit. And because of that offset, if I set my template right now where the binding meets the side, because of the offset of the router and the bit, I'll be a few millimeters back. So that's what I'm going to do. Just come in and set that right flush with that binding seam where it meets the side. Don't over tighten these. It's just snug. There we go. For the router, I'm using an old Porter cable I've had for about 30 years. And I've got a guide bushing in it. It's a 5/8 inch outside diameter guide bushing, and I'm using a 1/2 inch straight cut bit, which means there's only about a 32nd of clearance in there. It's not very much, but it's going to give me that 2 or 3 millimeters offset that I just talked about that I wanted. I'm also using a plunge base on the router. Very important that you take it in multiple passes. When you get your straight cut router bit, make sure you buy one with an extra long shank. Now I've got a 1/2 inch shank on this one. Next, I want to set the depth of cut. So I place my router in there, go ahead and plunge it down until it hits the top of the sides. And then you can use your depth stop here on your router to set it up the appropriate depth. Now, what is the appropriate depth? Well, I shoot for 22 millimeters for the mortise cavity. Now, to set the depth, I've always used this super high-tech block, and I tell everybody it's designed by NASA. It's just a piece of poplar, and I've got it set to 22 millimeters or 7/8 of an inch. And I used to use that with students for years. And then one time a student came in and took the class, and he went home, and a couple weeks later, he sent me this. That is a super high-tech block actually designed and made by NASA. Apparently his son works at NASA. Who knew, right? And it's got the nice NASA logo on there. And there you go. Machined aluminum, 22 millimeters square. And I use that now to set the depth here. 22 millimeters we're good to go. So before you get going, make sure you know how to work your router, how to work the plunge base and all that kind of stuff. Also, you're going to take it in multiple passes. We're going to go 7/8 of an inch or 22 millimeters. I'm going to do this in about 6 or 7 passes. You don't want to force the router bit while it's in there. Also, safety first, boys and girls. Never remove the router with the bit exposed and spinning. That just happens to be rules number 1, 2, and 3. Make sure that router comes to a complete stop before you remove this from this. If not, you're going to have an exciting day. And my shank is long enough on this router bit that it's actually sticking out from the guide bushing about a 32nd or so. So you think it's safe if you retract it into the housing. It's really not. Don't be fooled. Keep your seatbelts completely fastened until we get to the gate, right, folks? You also want to make sure that you're wearing dust mask and ear protection because the router's loud and the jig is designed like going to see the dolphin show at SeaWorld. When you go and see the dolphin show at SeaWorld, you want to sit right up front in the wet zone. That's where the action's at, and that's what's going to happen here. All of that debris is going to come out on the operator. So if you have a buddy standing around, just have him stick a dust hose up there and a vacuum hose, and that will help. Here we go. So once you've got the cut down to 22 millimeters or 7/8 of an inch, go ahead and release the body from the jig. And at this point, we are pretty committed, folks. We should have a 22 millimeter or 7/8 of an inch depth for our mortise cavity. All right, folks, this is where this jig really shines. This side cuts the mortise. If you turn the jig around, this side will cut the tenon. And make sure you overhang it off the edge of your bench here so that the neck has a place to go down there. And then just take some clamps, clamp it to your bench. Now, depending on what kind of bench you're working with there, you might have to get creative with your clamping procedure. I like to come in and put a big long one right here. The neck's going to sit in this area. Inside the jig here, there's a adjustable shelf that will adjust our neck angle. And there's a couple of plastic dowels in there. I'm using a truss rod with a width of 1/4 inch, and that's what kind of dowels we have in the jig here, because most people use a truss rod. It's about 1/4 inch wide. That's going to be used for centering and securing the neck onto this adjustable table here. So come in and take your neck that has your truss rod slot already in it, and just place it onto those 1/4 inch dowels. Slide it all the way up into the bottom of the template up there, and then just use these holders to secure it in place. So here's the finished cut of the mortise, and you now need to measure to figure out how long a cut you need to make in the tenon. So go ahead and measure from the top down to the bottom here, and then we'll adjust the tenon here, or the template for the tenon, for the correct length. So the length of my mortise cavity is about 80 millimeters, and so I just measure from the top of the neck down here, and I don't want to go all the way to 80 because remember I have that offset around my guide bushing and the router bit. So give yourself 3 or 4 millimeters less than what you actually need. I need 80. I'm going to set this up for about 76, 77, something like that. And then just tighten these things, just almost finger tight. That's it. You don't have to kill it. So to set the neck angle, the jig comes with this aluminum angle iron here, and you just place it inside here, and down below there's a little knob that you can use to tighten that, secure it in place. Do not over tighten the knob. So making sure that the jig is clean and free of debris here, you've got your center line clearly marked on your guitar. Place your guitar and run it right up next to that aluminum angle iron coming out of the top of the jig until it just touches here at the bottom. I've clearly marked here where my saddle location is, depending on the scale length that I'm using. And then I'm going to adjust the shelf to give me a gap here. What I look for is 3.5 millimeters of gap between the angle iron and the actual saddle location. Now, if you want to make yourself a little shim and tape it to there, you can. I usually just come in and eyeball it with a ruler. Now, I notice that my gap is much more than 3.5 millimeters, so I'm going to go down below and show you how to make an adjustment. So right here is a knob. On the back side of this little shelf, there's a little nut. If you loosen this and then tighten the nut, it allows you to adjust this, which will allow the angle iron to move on the top side until you get the correct measurement. And once again, I'm looking for 3.5 millimeters. So I'm going to fiddle with this for a few minutes until I get that 3.5 millimeter gap up there at the saddle location. Once you have your 3.5 millimeter gap here, make sure you go back down below and really lock everything in tight so it doesn't vibrate loose as you're working. As you adjusted your neck angle, perhaps this came up because the bottom of the tenon is hitting it. You want to make sure that this is flat. You don't want it high centered. Before I put my neck in the jig, I've already cut this at the approximate angle that I need for my neck angle. And it's about 1 or 2 degrees. And it doesn't have to be perfect because the tenon is not going to bottom out in the bottom of the mortise cavity anyway. So I go ahead and put about a 1 or 2 degree angle on this before I even insert it in the jig. That way when I make my adjustment, I don't have to pull it back out because I'm high centered in here. And this is ready to go. Once again, I'm going to set the depth on the router using our super high-tech depth gauge here designed by NASA. Just go ahead and put it in there. You are now set up for a 22 millimeter tenon. But remember I said that the tenon doesn't bottom out in the mortise cavity? So now I've got it set to 22 millimeters. I'm going to loosen it and drop it just a millimeter or so. So I'm actually cutting about 21. Now here's something else that is extremely important. That's your depth of cut. I go ahead and make all of the passes over 3, 4, 5 cuts, however many it takes, and I stop from the actual depth. I don't go all the way down. I stop about 1/8 of an inch shy of the total depth. I go ahead and fit the neck on the guitar and I check my neck angle. If the neck angle is off, I've got that last 1/8 of an inch to come in, make an adjustment, and redeem myself. That's important, folks. Occasionally I've needed that. So make sure you stop 1/8 of an inch shy, set the neck, and then if you need to, make the adjustment. 99% of the time I don't need to, but occasionally it happens. Now on the tenon side of the jig, there's a hole cut in it for a dust port. And I just go ahead and insert that in there like that. It doesn't get all the dust, but it sure helps do a better job than on the mortise side. I usually start on the left side, and you're gonna have to do several passes on each side. So left side, 2 or 3 passes, come around the tenon, do 2 or 3 passes on the right side, pull back over here into the corner, plunge a little deeper, and just keep going until I get to about 1/8 of an inch for my final depth. Here we go. Okay, this is what we look like at this point. You'll notice that you saw a fine demonstration of rules number 1, 2, and 3. I did not remove the router from the jig before that router bit stopped spinning. Somebody out there is going to do that. Then they're going to have to order a new template. You'll notice that you can still see the holes that I've drilled for the cross dowel. I'm doing it in a bolt-on mortise and tenon. And that's because I stopped 1/8 of an inch shy of my total depth. Now I'm going to take it out of the jig, go place it on the guitar, and check the gap at the saddle location. Go ahead and place the neck onto the body. You'll notice that the tenon fits right out of the gate. That was one of the issues with the LMI jig. I made it oversized so my students would have to do a little handwork. I've since removed that from the equation, so now it should just fit right off of the jig. You'll also notice that it does not go all the way down to the bottom of the cavity here. Should be just a little bit shy. I'm also not quite to my 14th fret line because I haven't quite cut all the way yet. I've got another 1/8 of an inch or so to go. What I want to do though is come down here below the sound hole and measure the actual gap, and I'm looking for 3.5 millimeters. So just take a straight edge, place it along the neck, extend it out to the body location or the saddle location on the body. What I'm looking for is 3.5 millimeters. Is it going to be a good day? Bingo. 3.5 millimeters. If it were not, you can make an adjustment on the jig. You got that last 1/8 of an inch to redeem yourself. But in my case, it is exactly 3.5 millimeters. And I like that. So let's put it back in the jig. And as James Brown would say, take it to the bridge. Okay, I've already cut to the 14th fret line, which should be about 22 millimeters here on the tenon. Let's go ahead and place it onto the guitar. Oh, look at that, folks. And I want to see a very slight gap right there. I don't want the tenon to bottom out in the mortise cavity. All right, so I've got my straight edge across the neck, across the top of the soundboard. Coming in with my ruler, I'm measuring 3.5 millimeters. Oh, it's going to be a good day. 3.5 millimeters on the money. There you go. So the neck angle is correct. Got a couple extra things to do before we actually set the neck on the body, and I might as well go ahead and show you. So here we go. Let's do that. So when I rough out my necks, I leave them just a little bit too long. I like the end of the neck to come right flush with the joint where the binding meets the side. And so I'm just going to make sure it's flush on the top up here, and then come in and just make me a little bird's beak right there where I need to be. And I'm going to do that on both sides of the instrument. And this one just happens to be a cutaway. Look at that. And right there. I've also left my neck just a little bit wider than it needs to be in case there's any blowout. And you see I got a little blowout right there from the router work. You've got room to recover as you carve your neck. Which brings up a good question. Do you carve the neck on the body or off the body? Well, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Coke or Pepsi? Mac or PC? You see where this is going, right? It doesn't really matter. I usually carve it on the body. But if you want to, if you feel uncomfortable doing it on the body, just get out a hand plane or chisel or whatever and go ahead and rough it out a little closer to your final specs. You don't know until your fretboard goes on exactly where you need to be. But I'm very close to my final specs already on that cutaway side. So what I do now is either take out a hand plane, a file, a disc sander, or whatever, get this excess on there down until it meets that joint right there. And you can pick your poison on how you choose to do that. So on my disc sander, I sanded this till it is now flush with the seam where the binding meets the side. And I've also put a slight angle on this that kind of matches the radius of the back. So using your calibrated eyeball, go ahead and make some crosshairs on your center line that are centered with your holes you've drilled here for your dowels. And go ahead and drill into there. Be careful, this is end grain. Let the drill bit do the work, don't force it. And that way you don't run the risk of splitting that out. Happened to a friend of mine once. The size hole I drill is just slightly oversized from the bolt that's going to go in there. All right, we're just using furniture fasteners, also known as super high-tech Luthier fastening devices. You can charge more money that way. And you're just going to insert that into the hole. However, sometimes the hole that I drill and this barrel are just mismatched ever so slightly, and that barrel's a little loose in there. And I want to snug it up until I can get a bolt in there, so I'm not hunting for the bolt. So I'll just take a little sliver of wood, place in there like that, and that will snug it up just enough until I can get that barrel in there. There we go. Use a screwdriver, make sure you're straight up and down, and then check it. But placing the bolt in there, make sure you're not hitting any of the wood of the tenon, and also make sure that it's going to thread for you. There's nothing worse than putting something in there that's not going to thread for you when you need it to. Once you have your barrel nuts and your bolts in there, make sure they're straight, and then measure from the top down to the center of each hole, transfer those lines over to the body, and drill the holes into the heel block. So with my center line and locations clearly marked, I'm going to drill a hole into the end block. There's only about a 1/4 inch left there in that heel block there. And I like to put a block of wood on the inside so I don't just completely blow out the inside of the block. Make sure that you hold it, not like that, but like that. You wouldn't want to drill into those fingers now, would you? That happened to a friend of mine once. Once you drill it, go ahead and open it up nice and big so you have some wiggle room if you need it, if your holes misalign. All right, let's put these two together in holy matrimony here. So take the neck, place it on the body, come in through the sound hole with one of these super high-tech Luthier fastening bolts, and with any luck you can find the barrel nut on the other end. And these are Torx screws or bolts here, so it's not an Allen tool, it's a Torx, and I don't remember what size. So just make sure you find the appropriate wrench. When you tighten them up, don't kill it. You don't want to crack that tenon. It's just kind of snug and a little bit more, and that's it. And when you're tightening this, you want to make sure that your neck is flush with the top of your soundboard. If it's a little recessed, well, now you got a problem, because it's hard to take the body down to that. If it's a little proud, that's not much of an issue. You can scrape it or sand it or plane it or something and get it right down in there flush. If you find, and I know this would never happen to any of you guys, but if you find that your center line is slightly off, just take a hand plane or file or chisel or something and narrow your tenon so you can slide it left or right. Once again, though, I know that would never happen to you guys. It did happen to a friend of mine once. And it's pretty important on the cutaway because you have to be exactly the right distance, or half the fretboard from that end there. There we go. Life's good. One more quick comment that I forgot to tell you guys. I mentioned that if you're not on your center line, just narrow your tenon down and you can move it over within reason. Also, you don't want that tenon snug in that mortise cavity, because if your center line is misaligned, you want to be able to move that thing left and right, or if it's twisted, you want to be able to straighten it up. And if that tenon's snug, you can't do that. All right, let's whip out our rulers and let's check our gap in our center line. All right, so with the straight edge running along the neck and out here to this location, I take my ruler. I'm looking for a 3.5 millimeter gap. And what do you know? 3.5 millimeter gap. If you happen to have a 4 millimeter gap or a 3 millimeter gap, it's still probably okay. You can take that kind of adjustment out of the thickness of your fretboard or the thickness of your bridge or your saddle height. And so you have a little bit of wiggle room there. What I shoot for in my measurements is 3.5. It's going to be a good day. I'm right at 3.5. Now let's check our center line. To check my center line, I just take a big long straight edge. I put it on the center line down here at the butt end of the guitar, hang it off the edge of my bench, and then line it up with the center line here. And then I go check up top and make sure that I'm right down the center of that truss rod. And I am. Life is good. Now, if you're not, let's say you have to swing it left or right. Well, then you do that flossing technique I talk about in my videos. Loosen your bolts, come in there with some sandpaper and just kind of floss it a little bit. And you can, a little bit here is a lot up at the nut area, and you can swing it 2 or 3 millimeters very quickly if you need to. I talk about that in all my online course videos. So that's how you use the super duper Luthier Academy O'Brien Guitars neck angle jig made by Skyscraper Guitars. Happy building, folks.